Hello. This time we're going to be talking about projection and volume, breath support, that kind of thing. But before we get to that, a little bit of a welcome, an introduction, a little bit about me to start. So I'm not a speech pathologist. I'm not a career professional. That means that I don't do this as my day job. I don't have a degree. Lots of voice coaches don't either, but I just want to make sure that you know that I'm not coming from a place where I've been doing this in school for 4 years, or I haven't been doing this as my job for, 8 to 10 years, anything like that. I'm relatively new to teaching vocal feminization. That said, I do come from a background of having 20 plus years of vocal experience, various different pieces of vocal experience. So that's singing, that's acting, that's voice acting, that's recording ASMR, that's all sorts of different stuff. So lots of different background in vocal experience, which means I've got a lot of practice at adapting, adjusting, changing my voice, that kind of thing. And I'm also currently learning to teach from a career professional. I've got a mentor who is in the process of getting her speech pathology degree. So there's lots of basis for the information that I'm passing along here. But again, just always like to make sure that people know where I'm coming from. Next up, some tips for healthy practice. Always make sure you're warming up. It's especially important for this episode. It's the kind of thing that we want to make sure that we're doing before we're projecting, because there's a lot of sort of volume and a lot of power going on when we project. Make sure to keep yourself hydrated. Water is your best option. We want to make sure we have lots of water available for when we do exercises of any kind, so that we can keep ourselves nice and hydrated. We want to make sure that we're not drinking anything sugary, caffeinated, or carbonated when it comes to doing vocal practice. So stick to water as much as you can. If you feel any pain, strain, or tension, make sure to stop for the day. We want to make sure that you keep your voice in great shape. We want to make sure that you're not in a spot where you're hurting yourself, especially not in a spot where you're catching a swallow, or causing yourself any strain, causing yourself any permanent damage. And I alluded to this one already, but don't catch a swallow. There are a lot of exercises out there that will point you towards this as a means of figuring out larynx positioning. That's a very sort of old, outdated method, and it can cause choking in the worst case scenario, so be very, very careful when it comes to this. Finally, the way that I was taught and the way that I pass along information as a result has whoever's learning sort of do it over the top, do it a little bit extra, do it with a little bit more emphasis than you maybe need to include in your day-to-day speech. So if you feel like what you're learning is a little over the top or a little bit too much for the way you typically want your voice to sound, just give it some time and practice sort of dialing it back once you've learned the basic aspect of it. So what is projection? Projection is part of how we increase our vocal volume. It's a good way to make ourselves heard without yelling. So yelling and speaking loudly, speaking with good projection and breath support, are very different things. You produce them in very different ways. We want to be able to sort of speak in a louder way without coming across like we're yelling or screaming. They have different sort of connotations, and they can be a little bit less sort of healthy for your voice if you go the screaming or yelling route. Going the high volume projected voice route will typically be a lot better on your voice just generally. It's also a good way to make ourselves heard without yelling. So if we need to be heard over loud environments like construction, like talking in a crowded room, like traffic, or just in a situation where we need to sort of make ourselves heard over a long distance, projection is a great way to make ourselves heard without having to yell or scream. What isn't projection? So we were talking about this already. Yelling is not a sort of increase in projection. It can increase your projection, but those two things are independent. You can yell without projecting. It's uncommon and difficult, but you can do it. Or you can project without yelling, much more common, much more useful, something that we do want to be able to do with our voice on a regular basis. It's also not just a vocal weight increase, so I can increase my vocal weight quite a bit without projecting it any more than I was. My vocal weight is quite thick now. I'm speaking with a much thicker vocal weight than I was when I was talking about yelling just a second ago, but I haven't increased the projection hardly at all. My volume's gone up a little bit because it does tend to go with that when it comes to vocal weight, but just increasing your vocal weight does not change your projection. Projection's a totally different beast. We're going to be working on that in just a minute. Echoes or room acoustics. So a lot of people will find that if you sit in the right place in the room and you hum the right tone, it'll get a lot louder all of a sudden. This is called a standing wave and isn't really quite what we're looking for when it comes to projection. Projection has to do with your breath support, how you're producing your sound, and how you're letting your sound go. The echoes or room acoustics will amplify your sound and will have your voice carry further, but they're sort of a helping hand to your projection, not actually changing your projection itself. So be very aware of all of these things. None of this is actually changing the way that you project your voice. How do we affect projection? There's lots of ways that we can go about this. Lots of different pieces that we want to make sure that we're working all of at once. The first thing is breath support. This is probably one of the biggest one. We want to make sure that we're using lots and lots of air when we produce our sound if we want it to be louder and if we want it to project a lot farther. A lot of people tend to sort of breathe only into their chest. In fact, a lot of people don't even really know that you can breathe much deeper than that. What we want to do instead is make more use of our diaphragm. We want to breathe deep, deep into our stomach. We want to be breathing in a way that makes the hand move if we place our hand on our stomach while we breathe in. And we want to use all of that air that we've breathed, that we've inhaled as we speak to make that sound louder. We also want to direct and focus our sound. So we're in a spot where a lot of people these days tend to be talking to microphones or cameras. They don't tend to be necessarily having conversations at sort of a medium distance nearly as often. Just sort of a byproduct of the way that the world is these days. And as a result, a lot of people tend to let the sound die out right as it gets to the sort of edge of their lips, just because it doesn't really need to go much further than that if you're just sort of having a conversation with a microphone that's very close to you, or things like that. What we're sort of aiming for when it comes to projection is figuring out how to get that sort of sending the sound back. We want to find a way to move that air and move that sound to the point that we're aiming for, rather than just letting it die as soon as it comes out of our mouth. And finally, speaking of our mouth posture is the last piece we're going to talk about when it comes to how we affect projection. Specifically, opening your mouth more. A lot of people, especially MTF trans femmes, tend to find themselves in situations where they feel shy about their voices or where they're trying to make their voices quieter. And those things are fine. That's totally fine. But it can also lead to speaking with your mouth closed a little bit more like this. Makes you very soft, makes it a little bit harder to hear, especially if I'm not right up into the microphone like this, which I'm mostly only doing as an example. Whereas, if I open my mouth up quite a bit more, you can even hear just the difference in sound that it makes, despite having not changed any of the other pieces of how I'm producing my voice right now. So, that's the difference it can make. That's the kind of difference we're going to see when it comes to adjusting mouth posture. It makes a big difference in how other people hear you. What do we need to be careful of? Vocal strain is always an important one to be aware of when it comes to things to be careful of when practicing. We want to make sure that we're not straining ourselves. If you're practicing projection and you feel like you're encountering pain, strain, or tension, like we talked about up top, make sure to stop. Make sure to relax. Give yourself time to recover. It's a very important thing to sort of give yourself the rest you need. It's one of the most important pieces of vocal feminization. Making sure not to yell. You're going to hear a few examples in a minute. We want to make sure that you're not yelling, you're just projecting. You're making your voice louder, but you're still in a spot where you feel like you're just talking loud, as opposed to in a spot where you're yelling. Privacy is also a concern here. If you're in a situation where you're not able to practice out loud particularly well, or if you're in a spot where somebody might hear you if they're closer than you think, this is not the one to practice, unfortunately. Projection, by default, tends to include a lot of volume lift. Volume will get a lot louder as you practice this. So we want to make sure that you're safe, secure. Make sure that you're in a spot where you can practice this and be loud, where it's not going to be looked at or sort of analyzed or get you into trouble. Make sure to take care of yourself. Make sure to keep yourself safe. We want to be careful of feeling that sort of darkening of the voice come in. So a lot of the pieces that we've been talking about here, for example, specifically the posture of the mouth and the increase of the amount of breath that we're going to be using, affect different pieces of the voice that we've been working on for other pieces of our voice. So for example, if we breathe in very deeply, sometimes that lets people, or causes people rather, to lower their larynx. Lowering the larynx increases the amount of space in the vocal tract. Increasing the amount of space in the vocal tract reduces darkens your resonance, and also makes your voice sound a little darker. So that's maybe something that you may run into as you do this kind of thing. It's just a matter of learning how to do both, learning how to take a deep breath in through your raised larynx position. You may also find things like your mouth being further open, causing your mouth space to be bigger and wider, which may cause a darkening of the sound. So it's just a matter of learning how to place your tongue, learning how to adjust the muscles at the back of your mouth, so that even when your mouth gets bigger at the front, it's still the same small size at the back, to reduce or eliminate the darkening that additional projection can cause. And finally, over thickening the voice. We want to be careful of this as well. When people increase their volume, they tend to also increase their vocal weight because those two things tend to go very sort of closely hand in hand. So we want to make sure that we're mostly focusing, in this instance at least, on the projection portion of the exercises, on the breath, on the focusing of the sound, on the amount of air that we're using, rather than the amount of vocal weight that we're using. We don't necessarily want to change the vocal weight, we just want to send the sound that we're already making a little bit further, a little bit louder. So let's start with some warm-ups. The first thing we want to focus on, strangely enough, is posture and stretching. So I recommend anything that you like for a good stretch, but specifically focusing on stretches that target the stomach, the back, the shoulders, the neck, and the arms. And what this helps us with is finding a good posture that we can breathe into. A lot of people don't realize how much of a difference it makes to the amount of air that you can take in if you're in bad posture versus good posture. If I'm in a bad posture, if I'm hunched, if I'm sort of crunched into one space or lying on my side or things like that, if I'm in a posture that's not quite as helpful for projection and vocal feminization, it's going to reduce the amount of breath that I can take in at once. And like we've been talking about, breath is very important for vocal feminization and projection. So we want to make sure that we have as open a posture as we can, shoulders back, nice and relaxed, chest open, feet flat on the floor if you can, all sorts of stuff like that. Anything that you can do that will stretch you out and get you into a nice, comfortable position to be sort of breathing in as deeply as you possibly can is super important for warming up to start working on projection. Next, deep breathing. So I'm going to recommend breathing in through your nose, then out through your mouth. As you breathe in, and this is one we want to emphasize today, you're going to place your hand on your stomach. And what we want to do is breathe in such that you feel the hand on your stomach move out. Once you've got that sort of portion of your lungs full, once you've got your stomach, what feels like your stomach full of air, then you're going to breathe into your chest as well to increase the amount of air that you've got total. Then breathe out on a sigh, or breathe out on what feels sort of like the end of a yawn. So. Just trying to do as much as you can for increasing the amount of breath that you're taking in at any given time. And the other part of this that we want to focus on are voiced sighs. So that's going to sound like this. Again, take nice deep breaths in, fill your stomach up with air. That's what we're looking for here. Does a lot of things, gets us used to moving that air again, gets us used to breathing in deeply. It also gets our vocal tract nice and relaxed. That sort of humming, sighing sound is nice and relaxing for the vocal tract. So make sure that you're not in a spot where you're tense, because if you're projecting and also tense, that can cause a lot of sort of stress and strain on the voice. We want to avoid that. exercises for projection. There's 3 that I typically recommend, though there's lots more out there. Projection is one of those ones that crosses over really well with folks who sing, so you'll find lots and lots of projection exercises out there that are recommended for singers. Highly recommend going and looking at those as well. The more variety you have in your exercise routine, the better. But the 3 that I can recommend are the hard ha, picking a point across the room from you, and the woo exercise. We'll go over all of those and what they mean. So the first one is the hard ha exercise. What we're going to do here is the same as we were doing in the deep breathing exercise a second ago. We're going to breathe in, fill up our stomach, then fill up our chest so that we're all full of air, as much air as we can possibly get in. And then we're going to try and move as much of it out as fast as we can in one short ha. That's the aim. We want to get as much air moving on that singular ha as we can. So I'm going to do this away from the microphone a little bit, just so that I don't blow out anyone's eardrums. What we're going to do is take in a big, deep breath of air. Ha! Well, that might be peaking my microphone. Sorry if that doesn't quite come through, but what we're looking for is the ha sound, with as much air as you can possibly push out at once. Of course, you won't necessarily be able to empty your entire lung capacity all at once. That's totally okay. What we're looking for is as much air out as we can possibly get. If you're somebody who does martial arts or anything along those lines, combat sports, you may find that this is very similar to the sort of kyaps or yells that you use. If you play tennis, you may also find that this is very similar to the grunt as you hit back and forth or as you serve. So those can be good examples for folks who do those things. If not, just look for the hard ha as much as you possibly can. Try and keep it nice and short. We want it to be a nice, quick sound here, just because that'll sort of encourage us to get as much air moving as possible. That's what we want when it comes to projection. The next exercise we're going to focus on here is picking a point across the room. Typically, I recommend picking something, like picking an object or a stuffed animal, or something along those lines that you can really point at and say, that's the thing that I'm aiming for, that's the thing that I'm sending my voice to, just because it gives you a bit more sort of room, and it gives you a more concrete sort of sense of what you're doing. And then what you're going to do is just try and, with all of that sort of breath production that we've already been working on, send your voice to that thing. So now we're going to speak as though we were speaking to somebody, say a sentence out loud, and you're going to try and send it to that thing across the room. You can even fling your finger out and point as you do the exercise if you want to, if that helps you. So you're going to think up your phrase. I'm going to use, hello, my name is Rose, and I'm going to point across the room at the thing that I'm sending my voice to. I'm going to try and send my voice to that object, to that thing. So, hello, my name is Rose. Quite a lot louder, quite a lot brighter in some cases. That's okay. If you're going to go one direction, go brighter when you get louder, when you get more projected. It will counteract some of the things that you're seeing or feeling or hearing when you're doing projection. So one more time, I'm going to use the phrase, hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? Quite a lot louder, quite a lot more breath being used. That's what we're aiming for when it comes to this kind of thing. Specifically, we're trying to keep it from being just coming to the sort of edge of our mouth and then stopping. We want to send that voice as far as we can. That's what we're aiming for here. That's the sort of feeling we're trying to get used to. And finally, and this one, it tends to be the crowd favorite, the most fun for most folks, the woo exercise. So what we're going to do here is basically just what it says on the tin. We're going to take a nice deep breath in, just like we have for all the rest of these exercises. And then we're going to take that breath and we're just going to go woo all the way to the top of our range. We're going to go as high as we possibly can. Falsetto is totally open here. You can do whatever you want. Just really send that pitch up and really give it. Really push that voice. Really make yourself sound excited. Give it as much gusto as you can. So one more time. Breathe deep breath in. Generally speaking, if your shoulders go up or you hear the that's not a very deep breath. We want a sound. So sorry, one more deep breath in. Woo! One more. It's a lot of fun, very enjoyable, very exciting. It's a good one to come back to. This one's a really good one to sort of pick up your vocal practice with if you're feeling a little sluggish, if you're feeling like it's a little bit of a grind. This one's a great one for that, so highly recommend coming back to this if that's something you're needing or if that's something you're interested in. And that's it. It's relatively straightforward on this one. There's not a lot going on when it comes to projection. It's fairly straightforward. It's just a matter of learning how to apply it and learning how to make it work with all the other pieces going on in your voice at once. That's the tricky part. It does take a lot of practice. Don't be concerned if it takes you more time to get in the hang of it. It does that for everybody. Some people will learn it faster than others, so not a worry. Take your time. Do it at the pace that's right for you. If you have any questions, feel free to direct them to me in any Discord that you see me in. I'm making this video for Yuko's Discord, so if you see me there, then you can ask me any questions in Vocal Feminization or the VT General chat. Or if you want, just ask me before you DM me and ask me any questions there. I'm also happy to answer questions offline if you know me from offline. It's totally up to you. And as a result, by direction from the administration of that server, my Coffee link is here if you'd like to contribute to that. But again, please don't feel like you need to. Don't feel like it's an obligation. This is very much something that I'm doing because I know that it's not financially accessible to a lot of people. I'm trying to make this as accessible as I can, so please don't feel like there's any pressure for that. I'd rather it was free for everybody, and it's not how I make my living. So it's not like I'm losing out if you don't. Hopefully you have a good rest of your day. Hopefully this was helpful for you, and if you do have any questions or you want to ask me anything else, feel free to let me know. Proud of you. Have a good day. Bye.